Pissing against the idealist wind. Cheekiness has in principle two positions, namely above and below, hegemonic power and oppositional power, expressed in the language of the Middle Ages, master and serf. Ancient cynicism begins the process of naked arguments from the opposition, carried by the power that comes from below. The cynic farts, shits, pisses, masturbates on the street before the eyes of the Athenian market. He shows contempt for fame, ridicules the architecture, refuses the respect, parodies the stories of gods and heroes, eats raw meat and vegetables, lies in the sun, fools around with the whores, and says to Alexander the Great that he should get out of his sun. What is this supposed to mean? Cynicism is a first reply to Athenian hegemonic idealism that goes beyond the theoretical repudiation. It does not speak against idealism, it lives against it. Diogenes may well be a figure whose public appearance can be understood in terms of the competition with Socrates. His bizarre behaviour possibly signifies attempts to outdo the cunning dialectician with comedy. But this is not enough. Cynicism gives a new twist to the question of how to say the truth. The academic conversation among philosophers does not concede the materialist position of fitting place. Indeed, it cannot, because the conversation itself presupposes something like an idealist agreement. An existential materialist feels misunderstood from the start in a place where people only talk. In the dialogue of heads, only head theories will ever come up, and a head dialectics will easily rise above the clash of an idealism with a head materialism. Socrates copes quite well with the sophists and the theoretical materialists if he can entice them into a conversation in which he, as a master of refutation, is undefeatable. However, neither Socrates nor Plato can deal with Diogenes, for he talks with them differently too, in a dialogue of flesh and blood. Thus for Plato there remains no alternative but to slander his weird and unwieldy opponent. He called him a Socrates gone mad, Socrates me noumenos. The phrase is intended as an annihilation, but it is the highest recognition. Against his will, Plato places the rival on the same level as Socrates, the greatest dialectician. Plato's hint is valuable. It makes it clear that with Diogenes something unsettling but compelling had happened with philosophy. In the dog philosophy of the cynic, a materialist position appears that is clearly a match for the idealist dialectic. It possesses the wisdom of original philosophy, the realism of a fundamental materialist stance, and the serenity of an ironic religiosity. For all his crassness, Diogenes is not cramped in opposition or fixated on contradiction. His life is marked by a humorous self-certainty characteristic only of great spirits. In idealism, which justifies social and world orders, the ideas stand at the top and gleam in the light of attentiveness. Matter is below, a mere reflection of the idea, a shadow, an impurity. How can living matter defend itself against this degradation? It is excluded from academic dialogue, admitted there only as a theme, not as an existent. What can be done? The material, the alert body, begins to actively demonstrate its sovereignty. The excluded lower element goes to the marketplace and demonstratively challenges the higher element. Feces, urine, sperm. Vegetate like a dog, but live, laugh, take care to give the impression that behind all else lies not confusion, but clear reflection. Now, it could be objected that these animal matters are everyday private experiences with the body and do not warrant a public spectacle. That may be, but it misses the point. This dirty materialism is an answer not only to an exaggerated idealism of power that undervalues the rights of the concrete, The animalities are, for the cynic, a part of his way of presenting himself, as well as a form of argumentation. Its core is existentialism. The cynic, as a dialectical materialist, has to challenge the public sphere because it is the only space in which the overcoming of idealist arrogance can be meaningfully demonstrated. Spirited materialism is not satisfied with words but proceeds to a material argumentation that rehabilitates the body. Certainly ideas are enthroned in the academy, and urine drips discreetly into the latrine. But urine in the academy? That would be the total dialectical tension, the art of pissing against the idealist wind. To take what is base, separated and private out onto the street is subversive. This is also, as we will see, the cultural strategy of the bourgeoisie, which achieved cultural hegemony not only through the development of commodity economy, science and technology, but also through a publicising of the private, secretly inspired by materialism of its inner world of love, feeling, body, with all their sensual and moral complications. For over 200 years we have been observing a permanent, though always contested, movement of the private into the public sphere. Sexual experiences play a key role in this because the dialectic of the splitting off into privacy and the return to the public realm is forced on them with exemplary violence. Bourgeois culture, oriented toward reality, cannot help taking up the thread of the cynical cultural revolution. Today we are beginning to understand that again. Willi Hochkeppel had recently sketched the parallels between ancient cynicism and the modern hippie and alternative movement. Neo-cynical elements have influenced bourgeois consciousness of private life and existence since at least the 18th century. In them, a reserve of the bourgeois feeling towards life is articulated against politics, as an abstract form of life forced into false heights. For politics, of yesteryear, and more than ever of today, is just... Let me try that again. For politics of yesteryear, why can't I say that? For politics is just as the cynics of the degenerating Greek city-states experienced it. For politics of yesteryear, and more than ever of today, is just as the cynics of the degenerating Greek city-states experienced it, a threatening coercive relation between human beings, a sphere of dubious careers and questionable ambitions, a mechanism of alienation, the level of war and social injustice. In brief, a hell that imposes on us the existence of others above us who are capable of violence. The public sphere of the Athenian market was electrified by the cynical offensive. Although Diogenes did not accept pupils in the usual sense, his didactic impulse, even if it was subliminal, becomes one of the most powerful in the history of spirit. When Diogenes urinates and masturbates in the marketplace, he does both, because he does them publicly, in a model situation. To publicize something implies the unified act of showing and generalizing. The semantic system of art is based on this. The philosopher thus gives the small man in the market the same rights to an unashamed experience of the corporeal that does well to defy all discrimination. Ethical living may be good, but naturalness is good too. That is all cynical scandal says. Because the teaching explicates life, the cynic had to take oppressed sensuality out into the market. Look how this wise man before whom Alexander the Great stood in admiration enjoys himself with his own organ. And he shits in front of everybody, so that can't be all that bad. Here begins a laughter containing philosophical truth, which we must call to mind again, if only because today everything is bent on making us forget how to laugh. Later philosophies, at first the Christian, the post-Christian still more, suspend the rule of embodiment step by step. Finally, intellectuals expressly confessed the non-identity of life and insight. Most pointedly, Adorno, who categorically distinguished the validity of intellectual, spiritual, geistige, structures from the notorious wretchedness of the bearers of spirit. That the destruction of the principle of embodiment is an achievement of Christian bourgeois capitalist schizophrenias does not have to be demonstrated at length. The principle of embodiment cannot be upheld anymore by modern intellectuals for reasons of cultural constitution. An intelligentsia that has its social role to play must become, whether it is conscious of it or not, a pilot group for existential strife. Modern philosophers, insofar as they can still lay claim to this name, have transformed themselves into schizoid brain animals, even when they turn their theoretical attention towards negativity, the excluded, the downtrodden, and the conquered.